A bell hanger was contracted to cut the wires, but this failed to stop them ringing. So even when they weren't connected to the bell pulls. When he subsequently tried to reconnect the wires, the guy got on his stepladder and the bell rang by itself right in his face, giving the guy quite a fright and almost causing him to fall off his stepladder and disappear and wouldn't go near the house again. To add to the theories of what was causing the mysterious bell ringing, Mr. Harris of Eastwood reported in a letter to the Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire Notes and Queries in 1898 that a son was serving with the English in the Indian Mutiny at the time of the strange incidents. One evening, when the ladies had sat down to dinner, the bells were violently rung. The maids rushed to the chambers, but there was no one there. The bell ringing went on for some time, allegedly until the arrival of the news of the soldier son's death. Whilst it could be hypothesized that it was his spirit bringing to the attention of the household the fact that he had been killed whilst in India, this seems unlikely to be a complete explanation of the bell ringing phenomenon in view of the fact that it went on for such a long period of time. It was also suggested that a possible explanation might have been that the governess employed to look after the children of Mr. Ashwell was a focus in a poltergeist sense for what was happening. As I'm sure you all know, it's commonly thought that a lot of poltergeist phenomena are caused by some sort of psychokinetic energy being given off by a troubled person in the house. But that governess wasn't there in the Reverend Heathcote's time, so that doesn't really explain why this went on. In her letter, Miss Hutchinson said that the bell ringing phenomenon had been mentioned in Bealing's Bells in 1841. This would have been as a result of a similarly mysterious bell ringing phenomenon at Great Bealing in Suffolk. Phenomena which, according to Miss Hutchinson, went on for several years, drove Mr. Ashwell to such distraction that he eventually moved out. The England and Wales Census of 1841, which you can see an extract there on the slide, shows no one of the name of Ashwell present at the house, and so the family had clearly moved out prior to 1841. As to what happened to the occupancy of the house after that, there are varying accounts. Brindle claims that the house was never again occupied. Miss Hutchinson claimed that the house was converted into several smaller houses. WBB stated that the house was left empty for many years, but was then purchased by Alderman John Brown, Mayor of Chesterfield, and that by 1897, Alderman Brown's daughter was in residence. Contradicting Miss Hutchinson, he claimed that the house remained as one dwelling and was occupied by the Brown family from about 1870. So you can see there an extract from the England and Wales Census of 1871, and it supports the latter claim, as it shows John Brown, his wife Catherine Brown, and their daughter Mary K. Brown living at Rose Hill, Saltergate, Chesterfield. However, there were no further reports of strange phenomena, and the house was demolished in the 1930s, to be replaced by Chesterfield Town Hall at that time. Okay, so we move on. So all that activity really happened before 1830 and during the 1830s. We're now moving to a later period in the 19th century to have a look at Sherland Colliery. During the night of the 17th of October 1867, the ghost of a man was seen by the miners at the coalface of Sherland Colliery. So frightened were they by this sight that they left their work and told the tale to the day shift as they were preparing to descend. So alarmed were the day shift workers that they refused to go down into the mine and insisted on going back to their homes and families. So what you see on the slide is the actual account as it appeared in the Derbyshire Times on the 19th of October, 1867. You may find, some of you, especially if you're using a tablet to attend this meeting, may find the writing a bit small to see. So I'm just going to read through it. The way it's written is quite interesting. So it's entitled A Ghost at Sherland. The old stories of goblin horrors and terrific apparitions, which it was thought had been nearly exploded, have been revived this week at Sherland by the appearance of a ghost to the men employed at the Sherland Colliery. Fancy a ghost in a coal pit. It has often been wondered at that ghosts should remain in dismal churchyards and dreary places of all descriptions when they might just as well visit comfortable quarters. But all the bad taste displayed by apparitions is surpassed and cast into the shade by the Sherland ghost, which has taken up its residence in a coal pit to the horror of all the sturdy Derbyshire miners employed therein. 'Twas at the witching hour of night when it made its first appearance. All was hushed above ground and everything slept in the calm moonlight. Deep down below, the sound of the dull blows of mattock and shovel showed that the rugged face of the coal was being attacked and the earth made to yield up its treasures. I think that what that's trying to say is there was coal mining going on in the coal mine. Yet into this scene of busy industry, this most awkward and ill-mannered ghost intruded. In shape, 'twas like a man, and that is all the horror-stricken gazers could afterwards tell. Perhaps it was a man. No doubt there were plenty ugly enough to be taken for a ghost. But be that as it may, the men left their work and told the tale to the day shift as they were preparing to descend. Horror fell upon them, and they became clothed with fear as with a garment. To thy tents, O Israel, was the cry, and one and all they gat them back to their homes and families and left his ghost ship undoubted master of the field. Monarch of all he surveyed. Such was the state of affairs on Thursday night last at Sherland, and up to our latest information, the ghost was still in possession of the colliery. It is to be hoped he will work hard and get plenty of coal. So apart from the parapsychological interest of the occurrence of the ghost, what intrigued me really was the literary way in which this was written. And in fact, this was a typical sort of way that newspaper accounts were written back in those days in the 19th century. So you'll have seen that there was lots of flowery wording, lots of really surplus sentences stating the obvious. And the author has got away with accusing miners of being rather ugly. And I certainly can't imagine miners today, not that there's any left here today, is there? But even miners in those days actually crying out, "To thy tents, O Israel." So plenty of literary license there, I think. And very different from the way such an account would be reported these days in the local press. Okay, so we're going to move on to the 20th century. And this incident was referred to variously as the Sheffield incident or the Dronfield incident or the Howden Moor incident because it affected all three areas. Dronfield, which is where I live, is in northeast Derbyshire, which is why I've included this item. So what happened in Dronfield? At 9:45 p.m. on the 24th of March 1997, a lady with a pseudonym that was used for the report of the account of the report of the incident at the time, known as Emma Maidenhead, saw a triangular craft fly over her house in Dronfield at a height of about 200 feet. This was first reported by a guy called Burns, who, as you will see, was a slightly over-enthusiastic UFO reporter. The craft was 200 to 300 feet across had cerise lights around the front and a blinding blue light underneath. The craft made a loud humming noise. 4 jet fighters flew at the same height and in the same direction as the triangular craft, just before and just after it. She reported that the craft appeared to be losing height. At about the same time, Ms. Maidenhead witnessed helicopters and light aircraft in the area. So that particular night, I think Dronfield must have had more aerial activity than it's ever had. Dronfield is only a fairly small town. Football players and their supporters at the Sheffield Football Club ground on Stubley Hollow, Dronfield, also witnessed the jets. Subsequently, it came to light that 2 witnesses at Shire Green, the district to the north of Sheffield, had at 9:45 p.m. seen 2 low-flying military jets flying south, that is, in the direction of Dronfield. Of course, jets flying at near the speed of sound would cover the distance from Shire Green to Dronfield in less than a minute. Hence, both sightings being recorded at the same time. The flight of aircraft moved away from Dronfield in a northwesterly direction. So this guy Burns put the triangular craft down as being a UFO. A short time later, Special Constable Tattersfield, driving in an area to the northwest of Sheffield in order to get a view of Comet Hale-Bopp, observed an aircraft descending really low and then heard a loud bang in the area of Howden Moor. She deduced that the aircraft had crashed. In fact, many people phoned the police, reporting that they thought that an aircraft had crashed. In addition, the British Geological Survey recorded sonic booms or aerial explosions over the Sheffield area at 9:52 and 10:06 p.m. that night. As a result of the reports from the public, an official and extensive search was made for the supposedly downed aircraft, involving helicopters, the police and mountain rescue teams, and continuing until at least lunchtime the next day. However, no crashed aircraft was found. Burns interprets the sighting of the triangular craft over Dronfield as being that of a UFO, suggests that the fighter aircraft were chasing the UFO, and concludes that one of the fighter aircraft had been shot down by the UFO and made an impact. Furthermore, he claims that a friend of a friend employed by the RAF unofficially reported that a UFO was tracked on radar at 9:55 p.m. that night for 10 minutes, at which point it shot off the radar screen. However, official information forthcoming from the RAF was to the effect that nothing unusual had been picked up that night on radar. So I guess this guy called Burns got a bit of a red face when he realised in due course that actually nothing had crashed. Anyway, the RAF eventually admitted that on the evening concerned there had been a low-flying exercise by RAF tornado jets in the area in question, presumably in preparation for a Gulf operation. Now you can see on the slide a tornado aircraft with the swept-back wings. So I guess in the dark, if one of those was overhead, because of the shape of it, it could have been mistaken for a triangular craft. Hence the slightly premature conclusion that it was a UFO. It is possible that the loud bang was in fact a sonic boom created by one of the aircraft in the exercise passing through the sound barrier, but the RAF was diffident in its response when asked whether this had actually happened. Perhaps not surprisingly, in view of it being a contravention of RAF regulations for its aircraft to pass through the sound barrier when overland in the UK, unless it's an emergency. Alternatively, a flash of light seen in the sky and the sonic boom could possibly have been caused by a meteor. Adding to the mystery, the question remains as to why military aircraft were still in the air after 9:45 p.m. when the exercise was meant to have finished by 9:20 p.m, unless they were chasing a UFO. Of course, it is possible that the descending aircraft that was witnessed by BBC Tattersfield and others could have been a civilian aeroplane. Although given that well over 200 people have lost their lives in aircraft crashes in the dark peak over the years, it would have been somewhat foolhardy to fly a plane low down to the ground in that hilly area in the dark. It has been suggested that maybe it was a plane flown over from Holland or somewhere by drug dealers going low down to the ground so as to drop drugs to drug dealers on the ground and worth taking the risk of crashing into a hill in the dark. So, possibility there. Another possible explanation for this incident that arose was that the low-flying aeroplane was the ghost plane that legend has it haunts the dark peak. So, was this all one incident, or anything up to 3 separate incidents, which all coincidentally happened to occur on the same night? So what we're talking about here is the unusual flight over Dronfield, the sighting of the low-flying plane, and the sound of a crashing plane. Could have been 3 different incidents, but rather a coincidence, they all happened on the same night. Okay, so what I did with the information gathered from very many incidents, of which I've just described a few, was to publish a book and a website. So what you see there on that slide is just a sample page from the website. So the website contains, I wasn't sure actually whether to document all this in a book or a website, as previous members of ASSAP doing a project Albion exercise have produced one or the other. But as I went through this, trying to scrape up the stories, it was obvious that quite a few had already been documented in other authors' books, especially about the ghosts of Chesterfield. And clearly, I didn't want to go copying large chunks of text from other people's books. A, it would have contravened copyright, and B, there would have been no point, as people could read those accounts in their books. But so what I decided to do was create a website and put in it basically a short description of each incident with references to where the interested inquirer can get more detail. So as you'll see from that sample page on the slide, most of the references are to other people's books, but some of them are to my own book. Because as I was going through this exercise, I was finding some incidents which had not previously been published, or where my research had thrown up additional information to what other authors had published. And I thought, well, I want to publish the full details of those. So I decided to produce a book as well as the website, and the book contains, as I say, incidents not previously published, or where my research has thrown up additional information about incidents, and it goes into greater detail of those incidents than the website book does. You'll see there the website address of the website, www.strangenortheastderbyshire.uk, with a hyphen between north and east. So that will be permanently there if anybody's interested in looking at it. The book is also called Strange Northeast Derbyshire because it was published a few years ago. It's no longer in print, but it may be borrowed from any public library in Chesterfield, Bolsover, or Northeast Derbyshire. Okay, so what I thought I'd do to end this talk, which I've added on specifically for this talk because it only applies to ASSAP members, is to try and give a few hints and tips from what I went through doing this for anyone else who thinks of undertaking the Project Albion exercise. So in terms of the sources of information for building up something for your area, certainly it's a good idea to look at existing books, but avoid copying wholesale pieces of text. Have a look in articles in local newspapers and magazines, but before you publish those yourself, ask permission from the publishers of those newspapers and magazines, of course. And I obtained some stories from, for example, Derbyshire Times and Reflections magazine, and the publishers were quite happy for me to use those articles. In the local studies section of Chesterfield Library, I found a scrapbook of newspaper cuttings about ghosts. So you may find something similar by way of scrapbook at your library. Also in Chesterfield Library, I found microfilm of past editions of Derbyshire Times. And that threw up some UFO stories. So by all means, go into any microfilm of local newspapers that are at your library. Another source of information is digital archives of historic newspaper articles. Your library might be able to give you access free of charge to such an archive, or if not, the British Newspaper Archive is available, and really all you need to do is subscribe for 1 month to keep the cost down. And one way or another, you should be able to find newspaper articles for the newspapers covering the historic newspapers covering the area where you live, which will be the one you're researching. And these archives go right back to the 19th century. So they tend to throw up various incidents that most people won't know about and won't have been published elsewhere because they're so old. If you have been in the business of doing investigations of spontaneous phenomena, then you will have reports of those investigations, and that is another source of information that you can feed in. When I did investigations mainly for ASSAP over about 18 years, between about 1992 and 2010. Quite a number of them were in South Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire and other parts of Derbyshire, but some of them did relate to this area of North East Derbyshire, and so of course I could make use of those incidents. If you belong to a local paranormal group, as I do to Chesterfield Psychic Study Group, then you just put the word around amongst the other members, and some of them may be able to let you have some tales. Or also you could put in an appeal in the local press for members of the public to come forward with their own tales. So, having compiled everything, you decide whether to publish it as a website, which is the simplest, cheapest, least hassle method of publishing these days. Or you may want to produce a book. You may have some good reason to prefer to publish it as a book. So a few bits of information here if you decide to publish a book. My experience told me that if you're a first-time author, the only economic method of publishing is likely to be to self-publish. Now, all the Project Albion publications are listed on in the ASSAP website. If you go onto the ASSAP website and click on Research, then click on Project Albion, you'll see all the existing publications for this initiative, and you'll see that most of the books were in fact self-published, as mine was. You, being realistic, you're not likely to sell vast copies of this sort of book, because if you're a first-time author, and bearing in mind it's a slightly unusual subject and maybe a little or no interest to people who don't live in the area that you're covering, realistically you're not going to get large numbers of sales. And if you realistically think there's going to be less than 300 copies printed and sold of your book, the only economic way of doing it is to use digital printing. So you need a printer that offers digital printing. And print on demand is quite good, because what happens there is that the printer puts the book on their website and people can order it online from their website, and they just print the number of copies that are required. So if just one person orders the book, the printer prints one copy. If 1,000 people order it, it prints 1,000 copies, etc. So there's no financial implications there for the author. It all sort of takes care of itself. However, in my case, I decided probably the majority of people that might be interested in buying the book would be more likely to buy it from shops than from a website. So I did want to sell some copies in shops. Now, if you're going to sell through Amazon and the main bookshops like Smiths and Waterstones, the book does need an ISBN, an International Standard Book Number, which is a unique number identifying the book. At the time I was trying to get my book published, it seemed uneconomic to get an ISBN, although I've since found out a cheaper way of getting one. But because of that, I sold it to other types of outlets, other shops, and got it stocked in the public libraries. And so people were still able to either buy it or borrow it. If you're producing a book, one thing you need to think about is publicity. I used every method of free publicity I could think of. So being treasurer of Chesterfield Psychic Study Group, I had a great long list of email contacts of people interested in the paranormal in this part of the world. So a mass email to them was used. I used my own Facebook page. You can use your local group's Facebook page. Put it in an ASSAP newsletter, try and get reviews. Put it on the website of your local group, if you remember, and on the ASSAP website, and local magazines and newspapers are a good place to go. If you write an article for the local media on the subject of your research, and then put at the end of the article, the book can be bought at, it's called so-and-so, and it can be bought at such and such places, then people will know about the book and they'll know where to buy it. You can also get mention of it on Paranormal Database, local internet forums, and Mysterious Britain and Ireland website. You may decide to give talks to local social and paranormal groups on your subject, and if you do, you'll probably find that you're able to sell a few copies of your book at the end of each such meeting. So I would encourage other members to have a go at participating in Project Albion. I know a number of you will be involved in doing investigations, which is an interesting activity, but you'll probably find, like I did, that you can have long gaps between investigations because there are simply no spontaneous phenomena occurring between one investigation and the next. So you can go for several months with nothing to investigate. Something like this, Project Albion, is something that you can do at any time. You can slot it in, fit it in between investigations, or whenever it's convenient, with no hurry, as you don't need to have a target date to finish it. So I think I'll finish the talk there. If anyone's got any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was really good of you. Excellent talk. We have got some questions coming up. So, first question is from Paul Garner. Paul, would you like to ask it yourself? Is Paul still here? I can't see Paul, so he's probably still here, but I will ask the question then. The Sherland Colliery case reminds me of the Cotsgrove Colliery apparition. I think it featured in one of the Arthur C. Clarke series. They interviewed a miner who was working in the mine when he saw the apparition of a man in a miner's helmet with no face. There's also an apparitional miner at Clearwell Caves in the Forest of Dean. I think Boggins, Knockers, and mind goblins are quite a common phenomena. But yeah, this is a particularly interesting one because it's very well attested, and we have newspaper reports. Any comments on that? Other colliery cases there, Bill?
Yes, I agree that it's not all that uncommon, despite the way the newspaper article was written, for ghosts to be experienced in mines, or miners being seen walking along to or from a mine. And yes, there are other mines actually in this part of Derbyshire, which I think I've also featured in my book.
Okay. Mark, you must be here. Mr. Davey. There you go. I'll ask him to unmute and he can ask his question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, good, okay. Great tips on sources of information, Bill. Really appreciate that. And we need more Project Albion locations documented. But are you still getting details of recent reports to document? And do they need follow-up inquiries?
Since I published the book and the website, occasionally a few more bits of information and other phenomena have come to light. Obviously, it was too late by then to include them in the book. So I have done some updates to the website. I haven't actively looked for more cases because I tried to exhaust every source I could think of at the time I was doing this. But as I say, occasionally other bits of information or a bit more detailed information about existing cases does come to light. And when it does, I add it to the website. And I've actually marked in green ink these changes. Some people might wonder why I didn't put it in the book.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I've just had a look at the website as well, and I didn't realise so much happened in North East Derbyshire. It's incredible.
Yes. Surprising until you get down to it.
Paul can get his mic unmuted.
Right.
Graham Philpott apparently once heard the Spriggans in a mine shaft in Cornwall. Graham, are you about? Well, he will be. Graham, do you want to tell us about your Spriggans? Oh, he's at work at the moment. He's probably talking to someone. Nick Terrell. Nick, do you want to come forwards and have a chat? You've got a question for Bill. Let's see if I can find Nick. I think unfortunately I have to ask people to unmute for them to be able to unmute.
Okay, is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Nick.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, my question was, what experiences have you had yourself and what actually made you get into the paranormal?
Right. My interest in the paranormal goes back to the age of 16.
Okay.
Or somebody else trying to talk at the same time.
It's the television somewhere in the background, I believe.
Yeah, sorry, my son's going to turn his PlayStation down. My apologies.
Okay.
Right, it's gone.
Yes, so back at the age of 16, I started to become interested in unusual aspects of psychology, like hypnosis and the meaning of dreams, interpretation of dreams. During my 20s, that turned into an interest in psychic phenomena. And every so often I'd borrow another book on psychic phenomena from the library, read it and think, oh, that was interesting, but I wonder if it really happens. And you take the book back. And then when I was 30, I borrowed a book out of the library, completely unlike all the other books I'd borrowed on psychic phenomena. It was a book called The Rock of Truth by Arthur Findlay. Great thick tome. And it went into a detailed comparison of the spiritualist and Christian religions. It made references to the author's experiences with the Glaswegian medium John Sloan to illustrate points about spiritualism. And as I'd got on in my 20s, I'd become increasingly disillusioned with Christianity. Don't wish to offend anyone at the meeting that's still a Christian, of course. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But for me, so much of it seemed irrational. And when I went through this book, comparing point by point the differences between spiritualism and Christianity, I found myself saying, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. Every time the spiritualist point of view on each topic made more sense to me than the Christian viewpoint, which caused me to go out and take other actions to get further involved in spiritualism. And during my 30s, I attended many different types of meetings to do with spiritualism. By my late 30s, I joined Chesterfield Psychic Study Group, which I've been heavily involved in ever since. Between 1990 and 1995, I belonged to physical circles and experienced some interesting phenomena, especially in the second one. As I mentioned before, by 1992, I got involved in investigations of spontaneous phenomena. So I found, once you're into this subject, you get stuck into one particular aspect of the subject. You do it for so many years and you think, well, I've given to the subject everything I can. It's given to me everything it can. And by then you've tripped over some other interesting aspect of the paranormal and you throw yourself into that. At least that's what I've done. So anything to do with the strange abilities of the human mind is of interest to me, really.
Excellent. Stephen, you've got a question.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So, yeah, you talk about the ringing of the bells at Rose Hill. So the portent of a soldier's death to his family at home is a regular occurrence in some paranormal stories. Do you think the story of the Rose Hill bell ringing falls comfortably into that category?
It could well do, yes. I mean, there were various explanations thrown up for what went on, but none of them seems to completely fit the bill. Would have been interesting to go back in time and do an ASSAP investigation of this case, and perhaps we'd have come up with the answer.
But,
yeah.
The SPR recorded a large number of portents of soldiers killed. One of them was from the Crimean War. And while most of the British military graves have now been destroyed in the Crimea, his is one of the 3 or 4 graves which is still there. It's down in southern Russia. And yeah, it's very interesting that. I think at some point we should actually look at that as a topic, and stories from the First World War and the Second World War and more recently about losses in combat and how families sometimes feel that they've had a portent or some understanding. It's obviously a sensitive topic, but I've known a number of people who have talked about that over the years. So yeah, Rose Hill was a fascinating case. How did you first find out about that one, Bill, if I can ask?
I think I came across it in other authors' books. But then I thought, well, let's dig into this more deeply. And so I found in the digital archives of 19th century newspapers articles in the local press about it. And that was kind of going back closer to the original source and time of the incident than what other authors appear to have published. And I also found in Picture the Past, which is a collection of photographs of old Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, a photograph of the house. And none of the other authors that have mentioned this case had published a photograph of it. So I thought, I must put that in the book. I had to pay a small fee to use it as it's copyright. Yeah.
I wondered if it actually influenced Major Edward Moore's book, The Bealing Bells Mystery. He was living in Bealing's Rectory, and his case is about 10 years after Rose Hill. It's 1844. He records the servants' bells ringing, and it becomes a Victorian archetype. But having read his book, I wasn't sure if it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, and if he wasn't, because he records obvious things like the atmospheric pressure. He records what was happening, the time of day. He records almost everything apart from where the servants were. He seems oblivious to the possibility that someone might have actually been ringing the bells. But But the Bealing Bells Mystery, James Wallace, who's a well-known writer, he lived in Bealing's Rectory when he was a boy. So I'll ask him a bit about it and see if he can throw any light on it. I haven't read Moore's book since the 1980s, so, and it's not an easy read, as I recall. So I might be doing a severe, what's the word? A severe, well, being deeply unfair to it. There you go.
Yeah, well, what he should have done, of course, is what they did at Rose Hill and shut the servants up for a period of time in one room.
Yeah, but then everyone says it's just rats in the wainscot, don't they? I actually, a while ago, we had a case that featured servants' bells ringing in Cheltenham. So obviously, I'll ask the obvious question, does anyone know anyone who repairs servants' bells or has detailed knowledge of servants' bells? On my Facebook, and people thought I was joking, you know, because I couldn't find anyone in Cheltenham who knew how to replace servants' bells. And that evening, my sometimes housemate, next door neighbour and best friend from school days, Hugh Wake, turned up, and it turned out he'd spent the whole day taking a set of